My name is Mia Carter, and I am 34 years old. For most of my life, I believed that love was something you earned, like a promotion or a good grade. I thought if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, and made myself small enough to fit into the spaces allotted to me, I would eventually be seen. I have since learned that some people will never see you, not because you are invisible, but because they are looking for a reflection of themselves. The deepest wounds, I've discovered, don't come from strangers. They come from the quiet, persistent erasure by those who are supposed to know you best. My father, Daniel Carter, was a man forged from discipline and ambition. For 42 years, he was the heart and soul of Carter Aerospace, a defense contracting firm in Austin, Texas, that he built from a small machine shop into an industry titan. The company was his life's work. My two older brothers, Matthew and Josh, were his legacy, strong, confident men who followed him into the family business without question. They were the proud pillars of the Carter name. And me? I was the footnote. The night before my father's retirement gala, I stood in the sterile quiet of my hotel bathroom, the city lights of Austin glittering beyond the window like a galaxy I could never quite reach. I was rehearsing a speech I wasn't sure I'd be allowed to give, a few polite, carefully chosen words for a man who had rarely offered me the same courtesy. On the marble vanity beside me sat a small gift box, wrapped in understated navy paper and tied with a simple silver ribbon. Meaningful, I had thought when I chose it. Now, it just felt like another hopeful gesture destined to land in an empty room. As I mouthed the words of a toast I didn't feel, to a lifetime of achievement, an old, familiar ache settled in my chest. It was the ache of the perennial outsider, the child who always picked the wrong crayon, the wrong dream, the wrong way of being. I had a feeling that no matter what I said or did tomorrow night, it wouldn't change a thing. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were screaming in a soundproof room, your voice swallowed by the expectations of people who were supposed to hear you most clearly? If you have, this story might feel familiar. And maybe, just maybe, it will help you find the door. Growing up, the Carter house was a testament to my father's principles. Everything had its place, every action had a purpose, and emotion was an inefficient variable to be minimized. We lived in a sprawling stone house in the Westlake Hills, where the lawns were manicured and the silence was heavy. Affection wasn't absent, but it was rationed, dispensed as a reward for achievements that fit a very specific mold. Matthew and Josh fit that mold perfectly. They were handsome, athletic, and effortlessly confident. They played football, took apart car engines with my father on weekends, and spoke the easy, shorthand language of men who understood one another without trying. My father's pride in them was a palpable thing, a warm, bright light that filled every room they entered. They could do no wrong. Then there was me. I was quiet where they were loud, curious where they were certain. My world was not on the football field, but in the vast, silent expanse of the night sky. I didn't read fashion magazines. I devoured old copies of Sky and Telescope, hiding them under my mattress like forbidden treasures. When I was 11, I built a 2-stage model rocket from spare parts and a cardboard tube. It soared 100 feet into the air before its parachute deployed, a perfect, gentle descent. My mother, a woman who lived in the quiet shadows of my father's world, clapped with genuine delight. My father glanced at the scorched grass and asked if I'd siphoned fuel from the lawnmower. I learned early that my interests were not just different, they were, in his eyes, lesser. He never said the words, "You are a disappointment." He didn't have to. It was in the subtle, constant dismissals. At dinner parties, he would introduce my brothers with a booming voice. "This is Matthew, just graduated from the Air Force Academy. And Josh, he'll be heading up our Advanced Propulsion Division next year." Then his gaze would slide to me, his smile becoming a polite, distant thing. "And this is my daughter, Mia. She's very creative." He said creative the way one might say prone to daydreams, a gentle pejorative for a child who had failed to grasp the serious business of life. I graduated with high honors in astrophysics from a university out of state, working 2 jobs to bridge the gap my scholarships didn't cover. My family did not attend the ceremony. My father was closing a deal in Dubai. My brothers had a golf tournament. A text message arrived late that afternoon. "Heard you graduated. Well done." It felt less like a celebration and more like an item being checked off a list. Still, I tried. I fought for a coveted position at the Caltech-managed Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, a world away from the defense contracts and missile systems of Carter Aerospace. JPL was a place of pure discovery, of asking questions for the sake of knowing, not for a military application. It was everything my father's world was not. I poured my life into my work. I slept in the lab during mission-critical phases, co-authored papers on stellar seismology, and developed algorithms that helped refine deep space navigation. By the time I was 31, I was the project lead for a new interstellar mapping initiative, one of the youngest women to hold such a position. But at family holidays, when my father raised a glass of bourbon for the annual Christmas toast, his eyes would scan the room and land on my brothers. "To the Carter legacy," he'd say, his voice thick with pride. "To my sons." So when the embossed invitation to his retirement gala arrived, a black tie affair celebrating his 42-year career, my first instinct was to throw it away. But I didn't. A stubborn, weary part of me, a part one thought I had long since silenced, felt a pull to be there. Not for him, I told myself. For me. To witness the closing of a chapter, to stand in that room as the person I had become in spite of his silence. I flew to Austin, checked into a hotel downtown, and spent an evening trying to craft a speech that was both honest and harmless. I still held onto a foolish, fragile hope. The hope that on this night, the grand culmination of his life's work, he might finally turn his gaze to the daughter who had charted her own course among the stars and see not a deviation, but a different kind of legacy. I didn't know then that the night would end not with a speech, but with a quiet, devastating act of truth. I didn't know how liberating it would feel to finally let go of a rope that had been burning my hands for 30 years. I chose a dress of deep midnight blue silk, simple and unadorned. It was a color that felt like my world, the quiet expanse of space, elegant and self-contained. When I arrived at the Grand Hotel, the ballroom was already a symphony of clinking glasses and muted laughter. A string quartet played softly in the corner, a melody too gentle for the room's palpable ambition. On a massive screen behind the stage, a slideshow played on a loop, a visual hagiography of Daniel Carter. There he was, a younger man in a hard hat, standing before the fuselage of a prototype jet. There he was, shaking hands with generals and senators. And there he was, at a podium just like the one set up tonight, his face illuminated by the flash of cameras. There were no family photos. No images of scraped knees, or first Christmases, or a daughter holding a blue ribbon at a science fair. It was a legacy scrubbed clean of the messy, inconvenient business of love. I found my assigned table near the back. My mother gave me a small, anxious smile as I sat, her hand fluttering nervously on her water glass. "You look lovely, dear," she whispered, as if she were afraid of being overheard. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence," a voice boomed from behind me. It was Matthew, his smile as polished and insincere as his shoes. Josh was with him, a smaller, quieter echo of my father's posture. "Mia," Matthew said, leaning down for an air kiss that smelled of expensive cologne. "Still playing with your telescopes out in California?" "Something like that," I replied, my voice even. "We're mapping dark matter signatures in the Andromeda Galaxy." Josh chuckled. "Sounds peaceful." Dad was just saying how proud he is that Matt and I are in the real world, building things you can actually touch. "The universe is real, Josh," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "And you can't touch it, but it can certainly touch you." They exchanged a look of amused confusion, patted me on the shoulder as if I were a peculiar child, and moved on to glad hand a table of executives. It was the story of my life, condensed into a 30-second interaction. I was the abstract, the impractical, the footnote in their tangible world of engines and profits. My father was holding court near the stage, a titan in his element. He was laughing, a deep, rumbling sound that commanded attention. He looked powerful, vital, a man entirely satisfied with the life he had built. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Matthew, then Josh, and his expression softened with a pride so overt it was almost theatrical. He saw them. He always saw them. His gaze passed over my table without a flicker of recognition. Just as the lights began to dim, my mother leaned in, her voice a desperate whisper. "He's going to mention you tonight, Mia." I told him he had to. He promised. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the carefully wrapped box on my lap held a gift for a man who was ready to receive it. But as my father walked onto the stage to a thunderous standing ovation, a cold, quiet certainty settled in my heart. This was not a night for reconciliation. This was a night for solidifying a legacy. And I was not part of it. Thank you, he began, his voice resonating through the ballroom. To stand here tonight, looking back on 4 decades of innovation, is humbling. But no man achieves anything alone. My success is a testament to the support and strength of my family. My hands tensed in my lap. This was it. I have been blessed with 2 sons who embody the very best of the Carter name, he said, his voice swelling with emotion. He gestured to their table. Matthew and Josh. They chose to serve. They chose to build. They have made me prouder than words can say. Everything I have built for them. They are my legacy. The room erupted in applause. People turned to smile at my brothers, who nodded graciously. My father let the applause wash over him, a beatific smile on his face. Then, his tone shifted, becoming softer, more philosophical. Of course, he continued, a knowing, almost paternal chuckle in his voice, not every child is cut from the same cloth. Some are destined for different paths. More gentle pursuits. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. The entire room felt the shift in gravity, the unspoken name hanging in the air. And we love them for it, he concluded, a magnanimous, dismissive wave of his hand. It wasn't an insult. It was worse. It was a pat on the head. A public absolution for my failure to be like them. It was a gentle, loving erasure. In the ringing silence that followed, I stood up. My chair made no sound on the thick carpet. Every head in the room turned toward me. I felt a strange, liberating calm settle over me. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a physical object in my hand. I walked toward the stage, my steps measured and unhurried. The silk of my dress whispered against my legs. I didn't go to the podium. I stopped at the foot of the stage, directly in front of my father. His smile faltered, confusion clouding his eyes. I held up the small, navy-wrapped box. My voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried through the silent room with perfect clarity. From your gentle pursuit, I said. I placed the gift on the edge of the stage, turned, and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't look back. My heels clicked a steady, rhythmic beat on the polished floor, a sound that felt like the first tick of a clock in a life that was, finally, my own. The cool night air felt like a benediction on my skin. I didn't go back to the hotel. Instead, I drove, with no destination in mind, through the sleeping streets of Austin. The city I had fled felt different tonight, no longer a landscape of ghosts, but simply a place, a backdrop to the quiet revolution that was taking place inside me. My phone, which I had left in the car, was lit up with a constellation of missed calls and frantic texts. One from my mother. Mia, what have you done? Come back. One from Matthew. That was a classless, selfish stunt. You embarrassed him. And one from Josh, surprisingly. What was in the box? I didn't reply. I knew the scene I had left behind. My father, a man who prided himself on unflappable control, would have recovered quickly. He would have finished his speech, accepted the accolades, and shaken every hand. But the box would be sitting there, a small, silent accusation. He wouldn't open it in front of hundreds of people. He would wait until he was in the privacy of his study, where his legacy was not on public display. The curiosity and the flicker of unease would be unbearable for him. He would eventually untie the silver ribbon and lift the lid. Inside, he would find not an expensive watch or a commemorative pen, but a single, framed photograph. It was a picture of the 2 of us, taken over 20 years ago at the regional science fair. I was 12, all knobby knees and fierce concentration, standing beside a ludicrously complex model of the solar system I had built out of wire, foam balls, and a small motor that made the planet's orbit. He hadn't wanted to go. It was a Saturday, and he had work to do. But my mother had insisted. I remember him standing in the crowded gymnasium, his arms crossed, a look of profound boredom on his face. But then, the judges announced my name. First place. And in the chaotic, joyful moment that followed, someone, a teacher, another parent, I never knew who, snapped a picture. It captured him with his hand on my shoulder, a genuine, unguarded smile on his face. It wasn't the polite, corporate smile from the slideshow. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated pride. It was the only photograph in existence of him looking at me that way. It was the memory I had clung to for 2 decades, the single piece of evidence that a different version of him, a different version of us, had once been possible. Tucked behind the frame was a small, handwritten note. It said, "I've spent my life trying to get back to this moment. I realize now it was a destination you were never interested in revisiting. I'm letting it go. I hope you find peace on your path." I'm finally at peace on mine. Back in my car, parked on a quiet street overlooking the city, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt light. It was the feeling of putting down a weight you didn't realize you were carrying until it was gone. The weight of hope. The hope that if I were just a little smarter, a little more successful, a little more something, I would finally earn the love that my brothers received so freely. I had spent my life trying to solve the equation of my father's approval, and tonight I had finally accepted the truth. There was no solution. The variable wasn't me. It was him. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. A few days earlier, a young woman from JPL's outreach program had asked if I would be willing to give a talk to a group of high school girls interested in STEM careers. I had been hesitant, unsure of what I could possibly say to inspire them. Now, the words came easily. "Your worth is not a negotiation," I typed. "It is a fact. Do not spend your life in rooms where you have to prove it." For the first time, I felt like I had a story to tell. Not his story. Mine. And it was just beginning. The call started just after midnight, a frantic chain of attempts to pull me back into the family orbit. I let them go to voicemail, listening to the messages later in the cool, impersonal silence of my hotel room. Matthews was clipped and furious, accusing me of a calculated attack. My mother's was tearful and pleading, a fragile bridge of "he didn't mean it" and "can't we justs." I fell asleep to the hum of the air conditioner, a sound blessedly free of history. The next morning, I woke up to a single text message that was different from the others. It was from my father. "We need to talk." There was no anger, no apology, just the clipped, authoritative tone of a man accustomed to issuing summons. For a moment, the old instincts kicked in, the urge to respond, to explain, to manage his reaction. But I just looked at the words, then put the phone down and went for a long walk along the river. The sun was warm, the air was clear, and I felt a sense of quiet that was entirely my own. I decided to go to the house that evening. Not because he had summoned me, but because I felt a need for a final, quiet closing. The red brick house of my childhood looked smaller in the twilight, less like a fortress and more like a museum of a life I no longer wished to live. I found him in his study, the room where he had made the deals and built the empire. He was sitting in his worn leather armchair, the framed photograph resting on the table beside him. The room smelled of old books and bourbon. He didn't look at me when I entered. He just stared into the empty fireplace. "I don't remember taking that picture," he said, his voice gravelly. "I do," I replied, remaining by the door. "It was the proudest I'd ever seen you. Of me, anyway." The words landed in the silence between us. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. "You think I was never proud of you?" "I think," I said carefully, "that if you were, you made it a very well-kept secret." He finally turned his head, and his eyes, for the first time, looked not dismissive or angry, but weary. "Old. I pushed you because I knew you could take it," he said. "You were always the resilient one. The one who didn't need coddling." A sad, hollow laugh escaped my lips. "That's what you told yourself, isn't it? I wasn't resilient. I was just quiet. You mistook my silence for strength, but it was just a child learning that her voice didn't matter in this house." He looked down at his hands, at the liver spots that now dotted the skin. "You were different. You weren't like the boys. You never just accepted things. You always had to take them apart, understand how they worked. You questioned everything, me included. And that was a threat?" I asked softly. He was quiet for a long moment, and the answer, when it came, was unexpected. "It was a mirror," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "My own father, he was a hard man. He thought my ambition was arrogance. He never once told me he was proud of what I built. When you looked at me with those same questioning eyes, it felt like his judgment all over again." The confession hung in the air, a fragile, dusty thing. Decades of resentment, of misplaced pain, of a legacy of men who didn't know how to love their children without seeing them as a reflection of their own failures. I sank onto the arm of a nearby sofa, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a vast, aching sadness. So I've spent my life paying for a debt that wasn't even mine. You were never a gentle pursuit, Mia, he said, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes were clear. You were a force of nature. I didn't know what to do with a storm I couldn't control. It wasn't an apology. Not in the way the world understands apologies. There was no "I'm sorry." But it was something more valuable. It was the truth. It was an admission that the failure was not in me, but in his inability to see me. And in that moment, I realized I had come here not for a fight or for a tearful reconciliation, but for this. To understand that the mountain I had been trying to climb was never mine to conquer. I had been trying to earn the approval of a man who was still trying to earn it from a ghost. I stood up. I hope you find peace in your retirement, Dad, I said. The word dad felt strange on my tongue, like a foreign language I had once spoken fluently but had long since forgotten. He simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the photograph of a smiling girl and a man who, for one brief, shining moment, had been a father. As I walked out of that house for what I knew was the last time as the daughter who was trying, I felt a deep, profound sense of release. I hadn't won. I hadn't lost. I had simply been set free. The weeks that followed were marked by a quiet, unfolding grace. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic transformation, but a slow, internal recalibration. The background hum of anxiety that had been the soundtrack to my life for so long simply faded. I returned to my work at JPL, to my small, sun-drenched apartment in Pasadena, and found that home felt more like home than ever before. My talk to the high school girls was scheduled for a month after the retirement gala. I spent evenings on my balcony, overlooking the hazy lights of Los Angeles, crafting a speech that was less about the science of space and more about the science of self-worth. I told them about the quiet girl who built rockets, about the loneliness of being the only woman in a room, and about the liberating power of defining your own success. I didn't mention my father by name. I didn't need to. They understood. After the talk, a young woman with bright, intelligent eyes came up to me. My dad wants me to be a lawyer, she said. But I want to study marine biology. He says it's a hobby, not a career. How did you learn to stop listening to that voice? I smiled, seeing a reflection of my younger self in her earnest face. You don't stop listening to it, I told her. You just learn to make your own voice louder. The talk was recorded, and a small, local tech blog posted the video. From there, it began to ripple outwards. It was shared by women in STEM networks, by university alumni groups, by people who saw their own stories reflected in mine. The comments were a revelation. This is the speech I needed to hear 20 years ago. Thank you for giving a voice to the gentle pursuits. For the first time, I felt like my story belonged not just to me, but to a silent chorus of others who had been made to feel small. My mother and I began to speak again, our conversations tentative at first, like walking on newly frozen ice. But slowly, warmth began to seep through. I was afraid of him, too, she admitted one day, her voice small. I'm so sorry I let my fear make me quiet when you needed me to be loud. I know, Mom, I said. And I did. It was an imperfect love, but it was love nonetheless. One afternoon, a small, square package arrived at my office. It was postmarked from Austin with no return address. Inside was the framed photograph. On the back, in my father's sharp, architectural handwriting, were 2 words. You were right. I held the photograph for a long time. There was no request for a call, no plea for forgiveness. It was just a quiet, solitary admission. A white flag from a man who didn't know how to surrender. I placed it not on my desk, not in a place of prominence, but on a bookshelf in my home, nestled between a biography of Marie Curie and a collection of poems by Mary Oliver. It was no longer a wound or a trophy. It was just a part of my story, an artifact from a past I had survived. I never did see my father again. My brothers and I exchanged polite, distant holiday texts. The family, as I had known it, had fractured. But what had grown in its place was something stronger, a family of my own choosing, made up of friends like Sophie, of mentors, of the young women I now made it my mission to encourage. Sometimes, when I'm at the observatory late at night, staring up at the infinite, star-dusted darkness, I think of him. I don't feel anger anymore. I feel a kind of gentle, detached compassion. He spent his life building an empire of steel and fire, but he never learned to navigate the quiet, uncharted territory of his own heart. My work is in the stars. My legacy is not in what I build, but in what I discover. And the most important discovery I ever made was this: you can't chart a new course until you're willing to let go of the shore. And my God, the view from out here is breathtaking.